Cool. So I'm going to be talking about using guardrails with AI code tools and my Eleventy template. My name's Steph. My business is chobble.com, chobble, CHOBBLE. I'm a freelance developer from Manchester in the UK. I've got about 20 years experience doing web stuff. I'm a former senior developer at Bandcamp and I was on the growth and optimization team there because I've always been super into really performance sites, and that's why I like Eleventy really. And apologies in advance for the accent. I'm going to try and speak clearly. Sometimes I've been told that I've gone all the way through a big talk with someone and they haven't understood anything that I've said. So if I am incomprehensible, please pipe up and let me know, and I'll try and speak slowly. So I'm going to talk about the Chobble template, which is a template that I've made using Eleventy that I've been using for my freelance business for the last year and a half-ish. It's an opinionated template for small business websites. It's got loads of different collection types on. It's got integrations with third-party APIs and other third-party stuff. You can do YouTube embeds and things like that, things that have been asked for by small businesses, really. Um, it's a pretty big code base for a static site system because it's got lots of different collection types, lots of layouts. It's got a search. I'm quite proud of this. It's got a pre-rendered search filter attributes thing where you can bring up a collection of products and then filter through the search of it, and those pages are all pre-rendered. So some sites that I've been working on are rendering like 13,000 Eleventy pages, which was a challenge to get working nicely. So I've listed a couple of examples there. There's the example.trouble.com, which has got loads of the stuff on and is messy and is just my kind of everything goes on there to test it out version. And then a couple of local businesses that I've done sites for. Nothing too amazing on those. They're both kind of like brochure websites, but they'll give you an idea of the kind of collections. Um, okay, so some caveats up front. AI code tools are controversial. Um, I don't like, it's a moral question, really, and I don't want to say where you should fall on it. My take is really, I'm a freelancer. I use whatever tools are available that are going to help me make more money. If that is AI code generating, then great. I would feel totally different about it if I was working in a company and my boss was forcing me to use AI generators or, increase my output or whatever. So caveats apply about the morality of AI. It's all trained on people's work they might not consent it to as well. You should always read and understand your code. I think that should go without saying, but I think that has been lost sometimes in AI stuff. You should describe the output that you want very specifically. And I don't have a computer science degree, so I might talk in terms in this that aren't very technical, so forgive me. So my goals with AI are to get it to build as much of the site as it can, basically. And for me to do the fiddly bits that it can do, there's a lot of boilerplate. But I don't want to reinvent the wheel every time. So I've got a shared base system that all my sites build from. And I don't want to create too much maintenance burden. And I want to keep the sprawl under control. I don't want the code base to become really hard to navigate. And I want to also make efficient use of LLM tokens. I don't want it churning for ages trying to create something and not being able to because it's not organized properly. So the tools that I use for this really are Claude Code on the web, which is connected to my GitHub account, and then you connect it to a repository, and you can do things in a little sandboxed Claude environment that you can set up environment variables and stuff in, which is really nice because then it's not running on your computer. You don't have to worry about prompt injection. Opus 4.5 from Claude works really well. It's a huge upgrade from a year ago. I use GitHub Actions for testing, and then I'll use a load of tools that I'm going to talk about in a sec. Biome, JSCPD, NIP,
Wait,
TypeScript.
you froze for a bit.
Oh, sorry. Uh,
Or is that just me?
Everything was fine here.
okay,
Okay.
It was just you.
Maybe it was just
okay,
me.
okay.
Okay. I'll
Cool. My internet has been
I'll take
crackling
that
this
part
week.
out. Continue.
Okay, okay, cool, cool. So yeah, so some tools that I use are Biome, JSCPD, NIP, TypeScript, LCOV, which is a coverage thing, and then Bun. I've started using Bun to build sites lately. It's really fast. It's a much prettier output than NPM as well. And I've got a comprehensive Claude.md file that reiterates the stuff I'm going to talk about in a sec. Claude doesn't pay too much attention to that file sometimes. So the problem with AI code, really, is that it writes code that works, in inverted commas, But without careful guidance, your code base will tend towards messiness over time because the AI code is probably defensive code, which swallows errors before you see them. So you don't find out about when things are going wrong. It writes really long methods that are really hard to read and edit. It duplicates code that's already in your code base, so should have been reused really, so nothing gets unified. And then it writes silly tests that don't really do anything. It writes tests that are equivalent to saying, make sure that one is not equal to two. Like it would never, that situation would never happen. It also does a really terrible job of cleaning up after itself and deleting code that's not used anymore. But much of this can be avoided by setting up some really, really fussy guardrails. So a note is that maybe AI will get better at this stuff soon, and maybe all of this talk will be totally redundant. It's a lot better, like I said, than a year ago. But I'd be surprised if it manages to get past these fundamental questions of, thinking about the code base more deeply. So there's various layers to this. The layer 0 I've mentioned before is the GitHub workflow and rules. I block any merges into the main branch until my test GitHub action has passed for the incoming branch. That runs a pre-commit JS script in Bun, just like I can, or just like AI agents can. It's just a script. And that runs those things I just mentioned, biome for linting, JS for copy paste detection, nip for dead code detection, TSC for TypeScript type checking. Then it runs a bunch of tests as well that I've wrote in conjunction with Claude. Code quality tests that spot AI cliches, unit tests for chunks of code, and then integration tests that actually create Eleventy sites with various modules in, build them, check that the rendered HTML looks legit. And then it insists on 100% test coverage in all of the files, apart from a short list of exceptions that are in my bun config file. This pre-commit and coverage check happens via the bun JS runtime, which, by the way, is really fast. It's easy to swap from Node to. Like actually having swapped over from Bun, I've read that Bun is really insecure and I should have been using Deno all along, but I'm not swapping for a second time. So layer 1 after the GitHub actions is my biome linter. Biome is a really fast code linter and formatter, much faster than Prettier. Because it's so fast, you can just run it all the time. Anytime you press save, you can run biome and get it to do a format. I've set up a biome.json with 20 plus rules that block the commit. It's not just warning you, it raises errors for things that would normally just be warnings. And that's strict rules like there's no vars, no for eaches, no two equals, you should always be using three, no console logs. You should only be using arrow functions. The functions can't get too tangled. Because with this complexity cap at 7, so I'll describe that in a sec. And then unused code. Well, actually, this is about nip. Forget the unused code line. So you should decide on your own biome options, basically. I've been very nitpicky with mine. You might not, you'll have your own code style that you want to stick to, and you should set up your options based on that. But I would encourage you to be fussier and to think strongly about the kind of code that you want to read. And I should give a particular shout out to that one I mentioned, no excessive cognitive complexity. This is a rule in Biome that says that each function can't be overly complicated. And that cuts out a lot of this AI writing really hard to parse, hard to maintain code by forcing it to write quite short functions that are easy, don't have too much nesting, for example, and aren't too long. So I've got different rules for this complexity. In my source folder, I've got it set to 7. I don't really know what the numbers mean. 7 complex. And that means that, all my source code is really like the rules, the methods have to be very short. But in my test folder, I allow that to be a bit longer because it'd be horrible to have loads of short methods in the test file. I don't really know how you do it. Okay, next layer. I promise there's not millions of these. JS is the copy paste detection that scans your code base and finds duplicated chunks of code. I run that at 3 different strict list levels with a different minimum duplicated tokens in it. And that's basically what's the minimum amount of tokens that it counts as being a duplication. And I set that to 12 tokens in my functional programming utility methods because I'm trying to use functional programming paradigms as much as I can in my code base. We're a static site generator. It's mostly doing transforms. So the functional stuff makes sense there. Forgive me if that makes no sense what I just said. Um, and then we've got the normal source folder, which I've got set to 23 tokens, and my test folder at 40. These are just arbitrary numbers, really. And this is what the output from JSCPD looks like. It tells you which specific sections of the code are duplicated. So the AI then can just get that and be like, oh yeah, okay, there's a duplication there. I've got to fix that up before I can merge into main. It knows that that's a must do, and it does it. A lot of the time it'll try and shortcut that with some horrible way of doing duplicating, like it'll change the parameter names so they're different, even though the code is the same. So you have to like catch it doing these horrible shortcuts. But anyway, and the pre-commit script has got a ratchet built into it for this type of copy paste protection. Each time it tests, it also tests at one level lower, one token lower, and if that passes, it updates the config. So the duplication amount can only ever go down. I've got a similar kind of process later on for code quality tests. Okay, layer 3, we've got the unused code detection. This scans for unused code in your system. LLMs have got a really bad habit of leaving code around for backwards compatibility, which doesn't make any sense in a static site, probably. It makes the code really hard to read. It encourages the LLMs to write tests for this code that isn't being used anywhere. It eventually just bloats up your whole code base with code that isn't doing anything, but is getting tested. So then it's really hard to pull apart and see, is this actually being used or is it only being used in tests? So I would say the second that code is not used, get rid of it from your code base. I've worked with developers before who will comment out code as though Git doesn't exist and they have to store it there for posterity. You're checking your code into Git, it's perfectly safe. Delete the unused lines. Next up, we've got type checks. So Eleventy has got, I don't think this is an official thing, Eleventy.ts has got some type checking for the base config. And I got Claude to write some type checks for Pages CMS, which is the CMS that I get my customers to use. So that means that my code then knows from both ends, from my config and from the user end, everything's strongly typed. So that means that it never has to ask, the LLMs never has to ask questions like, does this product collection have FAQs? And if so, is the FAQs an array? And if it is, which items have questions and which ones have answers? Because it's all strongly typed and it knows products always have an FAQs array and entries always have questions and answers. Because my Pages CMS system insists that my customers can only store FAQs if they've got questions and answers. So I don't need all this redundant code around like, is the FAQs thing a null or is it an empty array or whatever? It's always going to be an empty array or full array with properly typed out things in. This was kind of a pain to get set up in a static site generator, to be frank. The Pages CMS bit was kind of horrible, but Claude managed a lot of that horribleness for me. And then layer 5 is my custom code quality checks. So now that I've got those other previous layers in place and the code that it outputs is going to be pretty nice, I can then start being really fussy about how I want the code to look. And I've got JavaScript tests that run as part of the test suite that do code quality tests. So that includes stuff like, I won't list all of these, but making sure that the file and method lengths aren't too long, making sure that I'm not using let or var because I want to be writing functional code that's immutable, and using let and var is probably a sign that the LLM has put some mutable imperative code in there. Similarly, I'll block it from like creating a new object by opening the curly brackets because I've got a frozen object that I would prefer it to use. I don't want it to make a new set. I've got a frozen set that I want it to use. I want the code to be such that a new LLM agent that spins up and is looking at just a single file can't possibly think, oh yeah, this is just a set and I can add things to it, or this is just an array and I can add things to it, or whatever. It needs like everything's really, really super strict. So some of the fussier ones that I've got set up as like no nested loops. When I was building this 11 site that had 13,000 pages, it was taking ages because there was nested loops. So I put a code standard in thing that said, if you detect a nested loop, then that's error worthy. No duplicate function names. Everything should have at least a useful function name. It's not too hard to make it not be duplicate across your code base. And then no single use methods. Claude or code practices in general have this idea that if something can be extracted to a method, then you should do that, and everything should just be made up of loads of little methods. I think that's a horrible coding practice eventually, because it just ends up with everything being scattered all over your file. If a method, I think, this is my personal preference, you might totally disagree. If I think a method's only been used once, then you should inline that into the caller, or you should find some way to write it really neatly so you're not having to call out to some other method. Um, I am particularly fussy about the code that I write, and some of the stuff that I'm saying here will sound incredibly anal, so forgive me. And then layer six, we've got this ratchet system. So obviously, there's loads of exceptions to the rules that I've talked about. Some of the stuff that 100% code coverage, for example, is really tricky to test with things like environment variables and pointless as well, because you know that's going to work. So some things I've got exceptions for in my fussiness with all of this. I've got one file, code quality exceptions, which lists all of those, but it's got a big warning at the top with scary symbols and stuff that tells the LLM never write to this file. And it's only ever for me to make objective decisions about, is this something that is worthy of putting in this code quality or exceptions? And really, it should only ever be take things out of that. Okay, so how this all works in action. So I'll load up Claude and ask it on the web interface to, for example, make a new menus collection on my Eleventy base project. Claude will make a branch and it gets to work. It'll take my Claude MD instructions into account, kind of, and it'll produce a first pass, which generally has got a lot of the mistakes that I've just talked about in, unless it's something incredibly simple. Then Claude will push that to GitHub, and GitHub runs the full test pre-commit script, which Claude should have run because my Claude MD tells it to every time, but it never does. And inevitably, something will fail in the GitHub action. Then I ask Claude, if this is the case, to run bun run pre-commit, which runs that pre-commit script. It churns away then, fixing all the violations that'll come up and rerunning the pre-commit script until it passes. And then when it's done, the code is generally quite neat and tidy and fits in with my in-house style. This is the point then when I start debugging it and reviewing it once it fits the style. There's no point asking it to muddy up the code and make it even messier when it's not even like laid out right first. So hopefully though, that job of reviewing it is easier because there's less lines to review, it's more close to your in-house style. There's tests that you can write. The tests might be bullshit ones, but you can double check that. And then in terms of continuous improvement, whenever I catch Claude doing something that's annoying or is going to cause me problems in the future, I ask it to make a code check to stop that. So the next one that I've got to do is backwards compatibility. I mentioned before that Claude likes to say everything needs to be backwards compatible because it's in this fictional universe where 1,000 people are using this template that I made. That's totally pointless. So anytime that it mentions backwards compatibility from now on, which it generally will do in a comment in the code, that's error worthy, and it's going to raise an error message that says, Claude, there's no other consumers of this system. You don't need the backwards compatibility bit. Okay, to conclude, to reiterate from earlier, you should read and understand the code that AI agents generate for you. If you don't understand it, you're creating a problem for yourself in the future. The aim with all of this that I've just talked about is to make this AI code easy to understand. You've probably already got preferences about how you like your code to look, so make your AI agents enforce those rules. Okay, thanks.